Good morning. Okay. Good morning, everybody. And as already been said, this is Juneteenth week and Pride Month. And thank you, Iris, for reading that story. Now, I know some of you are fabric lovers, and you heard them talking about sewing. And I could just see some of you, your eyes start to light up. So I have a sewing story. I had to have a pair of slacks hemmed, and I'd always managed to get somebody else to do that for me. But this time I had to figure it out myself. Well, no problem. Anybody can sew, right? Needle, thread. I didn't need scissors. I could just, sort of cut through the thread to thread the needle. And I had seen my mom, when she sewed, she put pins in things. So I put in some pins. About an hour later, I'd gotten around both of the legs, and it was time to try them on and see my masterpiece. Well, first of all, I forgot to take out the pins. So that was an ouch. But second, they weren't even, and they were kind of scalloped a little bit. But I had a stapler. Minutes later, the pants were perfectly hemmed. Of course, now not only did I have the pins sticking in me, I had the staples, but the pants were not dragging on the floor, and I call that a victory. I definitely call that a victory. Now, I have a more serious story, though. Early one morning, a couple weeks ago, I was helping at the service center at Loaves and Fishes, and the service center is where we give things away. So this particular morning, it was cold, and even inside, I was really happy that I had my big warm sweatshirt on. And up to the window came a guy wearing sweatpants and a tank top and nothing else. No shoes, no gloves. He didn't even have on a long sleeve shirt. He was so cold, he couldn't talk. But, he really didn't need to talk. I could see what he needed. He needed everything. And I tell you this story, not because it's exceptional, but unfortunately because it isn't. It isn't exceptional. This happens endless numbers of times in endless numbers of places. In Sacramento, throughout California, throughout the United States, throughout the world. It's tragic, and it's huge. Now, normally at Loaves and Fishes, we wouldn't give away jackets until 8 o'clock. That's just the way that we do things. But this particular morning, we found a solution. We found a jacket with shoes and gloves and a blanket. So this particular man on this particular day probably was not going to freeze to death that night. It was kind of like the stapler. It's not the way that things are usually done, but it worked. And, while a jacket is not going to solve the homelessness crisis, for the person who receives that jacket, it makes a big difference. And I would like for you to hold that thought. Peter is my favorite. He is one of those stick your foot in your mouth kind of guys, And if I were to have a patron saint, it would be Peter. And I'll bet you he's pretty good with a stapler, too. But in this story, we heard about Peter doing something that was not typical bungling along that Peter did. He brought a dead person back to life. Now, the center of traditional Christianity is about a dead person coming back to life. But this is different. What happened to Jesus was resurrection. This is resuscitation. This woman, she was going to eventually die again, and she was going to stay dead. But, bringing a person back from the dead, even if it's just for a couple of years, that'd be a pretty big deal, right? So Luke started to tell us this story about this woman named Tabitha. And it says that she was a female disciple, and that is the only time in the entire Bible where the feminine form of the word disciple is used. However, since she was called a female disciple and not the female disciple, I think we can trust that there are other female disciples. And so another blow against patriarchy. Okay, her name means gazelle, and it seems that she had some status in the Christian community at Joppa. And Luke portrays her as a benefactor following the model of Jesus. The text says She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. So here's what we've got. We've got a woman whose name means gazelle, being Jesus' disciple, and heading up a welfare program among Joppa's poorest people. Then she died. And when Tabitha died, her ministry to people on the margins, died along with her. In the story that Iris read, mentioned washing the body. Now, that was a normal Jewish process of getting the body ready to bury. But they didn't. Instead of putting her in the ground or in a tomb, two disciples off to get Peter. Now, one wonders what they thought Peter was going to do when he got there. Did they want comfort? Did they want him to preach the eulogy? But they didn't bury her. Were they expecting Peter to bring her back to life? Now, there's only 7 back-to-life resuscitations in the whole Bible, so this probably wasn't something that they could count on. They could hope. We can always hope. But there would be no reason to expect this. And it was at least 10 miles from Joppa to where Peter was, and then 10 miles back. Remember, in those days, there was no embalming. There was no refrigeration. So, something needed to happen pretty quickly here. And Peter went with him. Back in Joppa, the widows. For them, their Shiro, their ally, she was dead, and they were mourning. And when Peter first got there, it was probably the typical pastoral visit, tears and prayers all the way around. A family member dies, and you call the pastor, right? And the widows showed Peter the things that Tabitha had made for them. And I want you to think warm jackets for cold nights. Like poverty-stricken, marginalized people today, there's nothing in our story that indicates that these widows were concerned with the possibility of a better life after life. This was not pie in the sky by and by. They were desperate to survive one day at a time. That was as far as they could see. And Tabitha was gone. How were they going to survive? So Pastor Peter ordered everybody outside. That's not very pastoral. And then he knelt down and prayed. Okay, that's getting there. And then he turned to Tabitha's corpse and he said, "Get up." And if we'd been there, we'd have been thinking, okay, the pastor has snapped. We better start looking for somebody to preach on Sunday. But then Tabitha sat up. I wish Luke had told us what went through Peter's mind. I wonder if he was as shocked as we'd be if we said to a corpse, "Sit up," and she did. And I wonder what Tabitha thought. And Peter then very matter-of-factly presented her to the community. The word got out. The church got more members. And so what? So what? First of all, was there even such a raising? I'll bet we've got as many shades of opinion on that in this room and online as there are people in this room and online. Lots of remarkable things happened in the early church. Maybe this was one of them. Maybe it's just a delightful story told by the Christian community at Joppa. But either way, Tabitha understood the flip side of privilege. To be responsible to those who are less privileged. A coat or a cloak might not seem life-changing, but I see every day people for whom a jacket or a blanket means everything. They'll wait all morning for a used pair of shoes or a donated sleeping bag. Because if they don't get those things, they might die tonight. What Tabitha had been doing was life-changing. But still, all those people in the world, all of history, why did Peter ask, and why did God respond to this request for life for this one person? She was a good community citizen, yeah. She was loved, but so were lots of others. So why Tabitha and not someone else? Why not everyone else? Why let anybody die? Well, it seems like Luke wasn't interested in why. Luke was interested in showing God's power. Peter called Tabitha back into new life with just 2 words: get up. Luke was not a process theologian. But God still worked through the people. That's how God works in the Bible, and it seems like that's how God works in real life. Peter had to drop what he was doing and walk 10 miles. The community had to care enough to break out of that mold of let's stick her in the ground right away. And they had to care enough to recruit somebody to walk 10 miles there and 10 miles back. And then somebody had to care enough to take that walk. And remember, there was not a single Starbucks along the way. Luke wanted his readers to know about the power of God. Luke wanted to show them that God uses that power to make things new, like life from death. Also, that God works in partnership with humans. And that power, that awesome power, according to Luke, is accessible to the church, to us. That's a big claim, and I am not going there this morning. Just because Luke doesn't seem interested in it doesn't mean we can't be, right? I think that we can recognize Luke's concerns, we can wrestle with them, we can honor them, and we can still ask our own questions. So, what does this say to us? Parkside Community Church, June the 18th, 2023. It probably doesn't say that if your cousin dies, Pastor Rajiv is going to be able to bring her back. Sorry. Life seems pretty overwhelming right now. Someone just dropped 36 frightened immigrants on our doorstep. Like Michael pointed out, there is always another mass shooting, always. Thousands of Californians and billions worldwide are homeless, while a few rich people have billions of dollars. The church in North America continues to lose its way, and those who remain Christian are so far to the right, they seem to have lost touch with anything even resembling what it would mean to follow Jesus. We continue to ravage our environment. Our justice system is as much on trial as is the current defendant, and the whole world is watching to see if that justice system is going to function. And we don't know what's going to happen with any of this. But in the middle of all of this uncertainty, in the middle of all these dead ends, God has called a diverse bunch of people and brought up to the 5700 Southland Park Drive and said, get up. Why has God chosen us? I don't know. Not because of anything we've done. Like Tabitha, we've sure done good stuff, but, resuscitations are rare, and there's a lot of people out there doing positive things. A lot. But let's think about Parkside as Tabitha. Not Regina as Tabitha or Becky as Tabitha, but Parkside as Tabitha. God has called us back from these dead ends and brought us together at Parkside because the work isn't done. There is still so much to do. For Tabitha, the work was charity, and we do that too. Oh boy, the way this church rallied when those immigrants showed up here, it was miraculous. I could feel that power and that partnership. And by the way, do you know all the things that Parkside is already doing? And I apologize if I miss your project, but we are helping SAC-ACT care for those 36 dumped asylum seekers. We continue to support the Mashwanis. We've got our homelessness LOC. We had the fundraiser for reproductive rights. We're working on accessibility to all. We had the recent presentation on ending gun violence. We've done voter education. We've written postcards on critical issues. We are collecting toiletries for loaves and fishes. We have a climate justice task force. Parkside, we are making a difference. But back to Tabitha. She did what she could. First century AD woman who was part of an obscure Jewish sect in the backwaters of the mighty Roman Empire. She was not in much of a position to influence public policy. And there's a lot of really good churches in the world that are in that position. And so they work quietly behind the scenes. Parkside is not in that position. We can work this from both ends. We can do charity and we can do public policy. So now what? You know, we might believe that what we say and do won't make any difference. That's not true. We fall into the trap of thinking that what we do won't matter unless we do something really big. That is also not true. Or we might think if it doesn't happen really quickly and right away, it isn't effective. Not true either. Real change is incremental and it's slow, but it's change. Now sometimes I just want to lie down and quit. Leave me alone. I've had enough. Nothing's ever going to be different. Ever feel like that? That's okay. It's okay to rest sometimes. Peter didn't reprimand Tabitha for lying down. She was, but still, we all need to rest sometimes. We need to take a break from social media and the news. We need to get some things done, get some sleep. Play with your kids or your grandkids or your dog or your cat. Pray, laugh. That's okay. It's even necessary. But God hasn't said that you can sit down permanently. The call is still to get up. And that's going to look different for different people. You can't march. That's okay. Vote. You can't cook. Okay. Write letters. Pray. For some of you, maybe the best thing for you to do right now is just to get your strength back, to rest from that illness. Then do that. Because there are still widows. There are still people without enough clothing, enough food. There are people with unequal rights, people that are marginalized. Pride Month, remember our LGBTQ siblings still need our allyship and our friendship and our support. Our people of color, our black sisters and brothers, they need our help and support. Besides that, there are still people that are getting slaughtered by law enforcement and slaughtered by people with assault weapons. There are people who have been condemned, overlooked, or purposely pushed aside, and they and we are all loved by God. Parkside, we are Tabitha. And according to Luke, we've got an amazing power on our side. Maybe it's huge, like life from the dead. Maybe it's a stapler. It's not a traditional solution, and sometimes it gets kind of prickly, but it gets the job done. So let's demand justice and equality for all God's people, beginning with the most vulnerable. Let's continue with the wonderful work that we've been doing of justice and mercy and love. Let's get up.